So, szia Budapest! Urulok, hogy mai heti velek. Unfortunately, this is all I have learned. Yeah, this is next level of anything. Your language is so beautiful but so hard that no one will stand. Today I will talk about Hanami framework and why to even bother with writing, why people really spend time writing new Ruby frameworks. Because this is quite an interesting topic. Yeah, enjoy. Things you will hear are partially coming from the PDF, like ebook I'm writing. So yeah, expect to have like this topic very much extended later. And don't tell anyone, but I had this talk a little bit prepared before because I did it twice, one in St. Petersburg Ruby Meetup and once as my screencast episode. Unfortunately, yesterday I got a notification from my favorite uncle, Google, which says that my episode with this topic just got like very quick spike, a high spike. And I wanted this talk to be like interesting, so I decided that I will bring you some unique topic. So I threw it away. Not everything, but I decided to bring some unique knowledge, and I will try to do it as much as I can. I'm Sebastian Wilgosz. I'm an author of Hanami Mastery blog with some screencasting, some articles. Balázs says that I'm Hanami Master, which means that I know how to smell cherry blossoms, because Hanami means exactly in Japanese like looking for cherry blossom flowers. So yeah, I know how to do it. Recently, I started working for Ascenda to get like also exposure for Hanami during my daily work. And this is where I'm working right now. And if by any reason you would be interested to be bothered by any random stuff from my personal life, you can follow me also on my personal profile. But let's go to the topic. Who works with Rails from you or with Ruby? Okay, so with Ruby, but not Rails. Is that correct? Yeah, Rails. Okay. And who heard about Hanami before? Yeah, okay, that's awesome. That's quite nice. Nice to see this because there will be like even more interested. But to understand this talk, I will need to get some introduction about how my brain works, because this is Hanami and Rails comparison, but the goal is not to prove that Rails is better or Hanami is better, but it was just necessary for me personally to actually learn Hanami. I was in the situation when I needed to learn Hanami fast, and I was Rails developer like for years. And my brain works this way that I learn from pictures, from images, by visualizing thoughts. If I want to learn something new, I need to visualize it and then associate this with something that I already know. So this is like making up pictures in my head and then putting connections. And I will send you some example. Yesterday, I learned that Budapest consists of two parts. One is named Buda and the other is Pest. I hope this is very new for you as well, because that was very, very interesting for me. I wanted to remember which part is which, and the first thing that came to my mind was, Buddha. And this is because yesterday I was on the hill with a citadel, with some tower, with some palace and swimming pool, and a lot of relaxing space when I saw people doing yoga. And this all with Buddha name, that's just, this picture appears in my head, and I know that this part with a hill is Buddha forever. But the other part was a little bit more tricky. Also, sorry for anybody who lives on that part. This is not personal at all. This is automatic, like as I heard pest. I know what pest is in English. This is what appeared in my head. And the next association that automatically appeared, why it could be named pest, was, probably because of this is placed there. Again, not personal. I don't have like political, strong opinion here because I'm foreign. But it's just to visualize for you that, with this, I will forever know which part is which. And this is also important because I needed to learn Hanami quickly while being like completely like Rise developer purely full-time for 9 years. And this actually works pretty well. I needed to map some known concepts to a completely new thing. Then what was new in Hanami framework actually appears to be less awkward and less alien, and I was able to learn it faster. So first of all, if you probably know this graphic or other graphics like memes about that, this is not a bug, this is a feature sort of thing. And in terms of Rise, there's a lot of noise around, like there are bugs, like some parts of Rise do not work well. But the truth is, like, Rise works with certain assumptions in mind. They have their doctrine, like strong opinions that people can like or not. And a lot of issues that are risen against Rise are features because of those doctrine. And this is what the core team and DHH stands for. And those bugs, natural features become bugs only if community will say so. And there is only one problem. Because of Rise is so popular in Ruby community, if people have different opinion, there is no real alternative. Like Hanami is the first real alternative to Rise because this is a full-featured Ruby web framework, and this gives a room for people who would like to have different approach from Rise to not start from scratch and not like fight with the whole community, but have some alternative thinking. And this is just an introduction for me. So in 60%, Rise and Hanami are similar. There are like end-to-end Ruby frameworks with like full feature set. Features are kind of similar, like there are of course differences, but we will get to that a little bit. Web first support. So both frameworks are oriented to support web applications at the first place. Both promote convention over configuration. So when you start application, you don't need to play with configuration. You don't need to configure anything. It just works out of the box. Both come with code generators. Both has focus on developers' happiness and the fast delivery. So like a lot of similarities, right? So why to bother, really? Because if there are like so similar things. And this is because of those 40%, right? 40% of different things. Like Hanami is web first, while Rise is more like web only. And this is like very rare scenario where somebody uses Rise application into non-Rise, non-web project, maybe API project. But we will see. Maybe we will have other insights I will ask in a moment. Then it's like a functional versus object-oriented approach. With Hanami, it's like more functional style of programming, versus Rise is more like object-oriented. There is in Hanami you will have a pressure to write like stateless objects, no global state, no object that actually contain state. But in Rise, everything actually has state. Like the user always validates itself. Like user object, you said user.valid because you validate the same object. Like this is the state that is modified. Yeah, I think this is the word. And so this is like a completely different thing. And one of the biggest mind shifts, I would say. There is like about the file management. There is a dependency injection on Hanami side, while with Rise, the policy states that everything should be just accessible everywhere. You can just mention the class from other files, just instantiate it whenever you want, or use the class methods and things like that. The other thing is the speed in memory usage. Hanami is extremely focused on like optimizing for speed, especially this second version that is in beta right now. Yeah, the whole presentation is about Hanami too. I didn't mention that, sorry. So Hanami is way faster and like instantiates way less objects. So in runtime, in development environment, in test environment, it works better. It uses less resources. This is done partially because Hanami loads minimal dependencies, minimum files by default that are required to perform, to make specific task, while Rails by default loads everything. And the issue is like, I'm not sure if you experience that, but over time when the project grows, like Rails console or running the test over and over again takes way more time to load than in the fresh application. And in Hanami, this issue is just not existing. And this is something that personally for me is very, very awesome. And then final thing I will mention today is the differences within abstraction. There is more abstractions in Hanami than more building blocks than in Rails. So, web first. Can I ask, what do you use Ruby for in your project? Web. Only web? Web API? Yeah, okay. I personally, just to clarify, I'm not considering API-only applications as web, even though this is still HTTP. But yeah, it's kind of like yeah. Sometimes they just have no interface or just crawlers that yeah. Oh yeah, this is nice. I do it too. Someone else? Scripting. Awesome. Command line utilities. Yeah, scripting or not.
That's different. Scripting is when you write.
Okay, I never distinguished that, so thanks. And the thing is, like, as we have like tons of kinds of coffee, we also have different applications, and we could use Ruby for very much different stuff except web, like web API, but also like advanced scripting, reactive systems, like webhooks, applications that do something based on webhook reaction or the event. So this is when really they accept API, but this is like just not really interface. They are just sitting somewhere. Some crawlers that just constantly fetch new pages, find something, process HTML stuff or data processing. Then there are also like applications that are purely for business logic and to decide if a specific action can be done or not. And now with Hanami, it actually makes it real to use Ruby to write all those kinds of applications. And mostly, except web, I never seen like I almost never seen Rails being used in like smaller applications, like writing crawlers, data processing, like reactive systems, even like that works with gRPC, because the thing is that Rails loads everything and does not allow you to disable stuff that is purely dedicated for web. And yeah, like this is huge. And this is where Sinatra and Rhoda Ruby application framework actually come into the role, into the stand and start shine. And this is where this is the niche that some developers actually need those frameworks, even though they are very small and the community behind them is relatively small. So, next thing, Hanami is built from functions and pure functions. Does anybody know what is pure function? Yes, no side effects. It means like when you call it, no matter how many times with the same arguments, it will always do the same thing and nothing else will be changed. Such functions are very easy, way easier to test. Like if you have like, yeah, we will go to the examples, but they are also easier to maintain. You don't need to bother. If you just pass arguments, you are sure that nothing else will happen. There is like no database updates every time silently. So some examples. Is this a pure function? Yes. The next. Yes, this is also. And the third example, no. It will always return the different result. Next one? No. It will create like different records based on the primary ID. And then the HTTP, also no. So because there might be like it depends on the external system, there might be like connection issue, so the function will behave differently. And how it works in Hanami too. Like if you think about the features that are required to process requests from A to Z, like for the web application, almost everything. And I actually cut out 2 features because I had no place, but they were also green. But this in Hanami, most of the framework or most of the application is like built from pure functions, which means there is no side effects. It is very easy to test, and only about persistence stuff, the database communication, and the post conditions like notifying external systems, publishing some events. This is where those are not like pure functions, which is awesome from the testing perspective, but also from reliability. It narrows down the problems that can appear in your code to very small portion of the framework that are easy to find and easy to identify. And this is why like I just fall in love into this object. And how it is done in Hanami, almost everything is a callable object. So components, building blocks like actions, router, all that is a callable object. So you can call it, everything responds to a method call, and this is kind of unified. And why? Because of compatibility. If we have like very small, very simple blocks, we can reuse them. We can put them one to each other. And also this approach was chosen because it is built into the Ruby. Like we can, the proc object actually responds to call. We can call a method using the call method in pure Ruby. And also like if we do this syntax with ampersand on the array, it actually under the hood also calls each of the items. They send the method upcase and call the call method on each of them. And this was chosen because it was already built in, and this is also used by rack engine to process requests. So Hanami is rack compatible, for example, and things like that. With this, from small, focused, callable objects, we can build bigger components. We can build features, but also whole applications or sets of applications. Hanami is built in the way that each part, each component is independent. So for example, we have Hanami router, and Hanami router is a gem that is not related to Hanami at all. It just processes a rack request. So it can be used by other gems or other applications like Sinatra, whatever, to build completely crazy stuff that is not related to Hanami at all. And same for actions, same for views, same for whole persistence logic. And the funny thing is that because those blocks are so independent and granulated, we can actually disable them. So if we don't need persistence, we can disable the whole persistence in Hanami and don't load it at all. And this is completely not possible with Active Record. So this is why compatibility is really important and why I love it in Hanami. Oh, something happened. Yeah, whatever. Oh, no. Yeah, something blown up, but this is not our minds, I think. Sorry? Yeah, this is the next slide. Yes, but it should be like your minds were blown up because of compatibility, right? Blocks, but actually, yeah, just my computer died. But this is the perfect slide to actually die. Yeah, so I am actually, exactly. So the next thing is about stateful versus stateless objects. And this is an example of the stateful objects. When you initialize something, you assign a variable to the instance variable, then you return the multiplier, like multiply this number by 10 with the call method. And everything is supposedly fine if you get the first 3 lines. Like you can call it each time. But then if somebody will call the replace method on it, the call suddenly will start returning different values. And this is a silly example, I know that, but imagine having such code, such a dependency in your system, when in one place you just replace or change the value of the instance variable of the object, and then suddenly this object behaves differently. It can be loaded by other classes already, and then you have very hard bugs to debug, to find. Another example I found quite common is when we have in call methods assignment to an instance variable, like a result in this case, and purely because, this is just a typo. There should be like, this at should be like in it, so sorry. But the thing is that this result is assigned as an instance variable purely to not pass it down here as an argument, because developers don't like just passing down the parameters, like to do generate, to send, or something like several times, just passing the same thing over and over. But what it does, it actually makes this code thread unsafe, because when we call the same object twice in 2 threads, this will result with 2 different repositories being called, and only the second one will be generated but twice and sent twice to the client, for example. So this is the anti-pattern that that is really hard to notice during the code reviews, but this is just a thread when you use stateful objects, repository or application. So stateful objects are bug prone, harder to test, and not thread safe. And in Hanami, this is not the case at all. Like Hanami is thread safe by default. Like everything in Hanami is thread safe. There is a clear separation between data, so an object that holds a state, and this state is not modificable, so this is like a frozen object that cannot be updated at all, and the function that actually has no state at all. And this clear separation makes Hanami applications much more reliable than average Rails application. And this is not because of the better developers working on projects that use Hanami, but because of how frameworks support better architecture by default. So the next part is about dependency injection. I don't plan to go deep dive into this topic because I did a lot already about it, published several resources about dependency injection in Hanami and pure Ruby as well. So we'll not go into the big details, but just long story short, dependency injection is a way to manage dependencies in your system, and it also makes application easier to test, allows for less side effects, and more memory optimization by creating less objects across the system, because it is always costful for the processor to create objects during the runtime. So there are several possibilities, several ways, several advantages that are used in Hanami because of leveraging dependency injection very heavily. But until there will be questions, I would say I will not dive into the topic very, very deeply. So this is the Rails approach. The Rails approach about like managing dependencies. This is actually a code from Basecamp, pretty famous screenshot from DHH. This is real code from the code base, when you have like tons of modules included, which brings you extended functionality by defining methods, by bringing you access to new objects, just new functionality. And this just is a magic. Like it works by very implicit, like the logic is, and this code is way harder to test because each actual method, each class that includes all of these modules should be tested against each of those, and this is really hard to be done well. And I'm not saying that they don't do it well. Probably they do. Like Basecamp employs one of the best developers in the world, so I bet they do it well. But still, it's just not easy. It's just against their policy to make developers happy and like develop applications that scale well easily. But to make it more simplified, like in Rails, you would see something like this. So you have a string, and if you want to classify this string, you just run the method on the string itself. So in Hanami, you would inject a dependency with this functionality. So to modify a string. So you don't include or extend the string class as this is done here, but you actually have a very small object that have defined behavior to modify the strings. Yeah. Any questions at this point, maybe? Further. So next topic is about loading files. Both frameworks have like promote convention over a configuration. So as long as you follow the structure, the suggested structure of folders and files to place your code, everything is loaded without any issues. So for example, if you will define lib folder in top level of the Rails project, it will not be loaded by default. The files there won't be accessible by default. And this is normal, but you can configure it by adding this folder to the application configuration in Rails applications. And similar thing happens in Hanami. As long as you just use folders that are just by default loaded, everything works the same. Both frameworks use site work to actually load files. This is a pretty cool thing, but the difference is when the files are loaded. So in Rails, on boot time, everything is loaded. When you Rails, and it is true for all environments, like for production, for development, for tests. So over time, running console actually slows down because each time you want to run a console, the whole application is booted. It's not like the server is not running, well, whatever. Well, the whole application is loaded at once to the memory when you load the application, and this is my goal. In Hanami, actually, the opposite is true. Only minimal set of features is loaded to do a single task. So when you run the console, only files that are required to run the console are loaded, and only when you call a single class or object, this object is loaded to the memory, only then. So there is like no delay of waiting every time you run a console or run a test to load everything at once. So this speeds up everything from CI checks to just daily development and things like that. But this is not true for production. For production, actually, we can like all files are frozen and all files are loaded by default to make the production way faster. So this works then the same as in Rails. And about abstractions. I'm not sure if you know this because this is like extremely old joke from Ruby community. And this is about like the MVC approach. Like, yeah, I'm not sure if I even need to explain, but in terms of Rails applications, there is just no clear guidelines where to put the logic, the business logic. And there is like a clear guide, like views needs to be clear. There should be no logic in views. Controllers should be very skinny. Yeah, and the rest is models. So There is a shift into more sophisticated architecture recently in Ruby, but unfortunately, there is still a long way to go. So Hanami actually approaches to fix it, to very much improve on it. And in Hanami, you have more abstractions, more different building blocks than in Rails. They are smaller, they are just self-contained, that just do less, but they are more of them. So you end up in Rails often having bigger but less files. In Hanami, you will end up with more but smaller files. And this is something to consider because this affects the workflow. For me, it was kind of tough to shift from smaller number of files that I can browse, I can search for, open, and navigate to actually doing the reverse. Like each method is just a separate file or separate class. So there's like more nesting. Yeah, this was just different mind shift, and I needed to adjust my workflow. About the abstractions in Rails, we have roads. There we have controllers, extendable but by concerns. We have also the models, usually called from controllers, also extendable by concerns. We have views that are basically only templates. This is just a template for rendering HTML, and there should be no real logic put into the template. And this is why people started to writing things like decorators and some stuff, some abstractions that actually allow to put logic into. Then we have milers and helpers, and more or less that's all. Like there are some other stuff, but this is just the basics. And in Hanami, things are a little bit different. Hanami orchestrates 3 different gem families. One is dry-RB for providing those small functions like validations, like string modifications I show, like inflector. This is also from dry. So this is like 50 different gems, each of them doing very single focused task. There is a ROM-RB, which is an alternative for active record. This is for persistence layer. And there is Hanami that actually orchestrates all of that together and wraps it into the complete sophisticated web framework. But what it means, we also have roads in Hanami, we have actions, we have contracts that actually come from dry-RB, often used inside actions to validate the incoming request. Then we have a persistence part that is managed by ROM, and this is split into repositories, relations, and entities. We have also view part, the rendering part, but it's not only templates. We have 3 different abstractions to manage view logic. So there is no need to actually add custom decorators because framework supports developers since day one where to put all of the code. And also we have mailers and helpers. So something is similar here. The difference between controller and actions is pretty simple. In Rails, one controller has multiple actions defined as methods. Like each method is action, and this is even named like that. And in Hanami, there is no controller, there is just actions. Like each action is just a separate file, which I call method. So this is just a callable object, and this is just only one thing. Then about views. In Rails, you have a view that actually does a lot of things. The logic related to present views is placed in views or controllers, and you cannot avoid that if you just follow the framework guides. You can, of course, add own abstractions or add some custom gems like decorator, but not how Rails actually guides you to do it. There is like a presentation logic, there is structure of the HTML document, and the helpers that are used by the views. There are like several things that are done by the single class, and in Hanami this is split into 3 parts. So there is a view object. This is a Ruby object that actually contains the logic to present something. There is a part that actually decorates some data, like maybe add some link highlights or whatever. And there is a template that actually structures the logic, and this leaves the template without the logic at all. And the cool thing that there is really hard to mess it up, because in Rails you have global access to everything, and there is often a situation where you have direct access from views to the database objects, and at the end you end up with n+1 queries because a single partial is loaded in the list, and each view loads like each object separately, and so on. In Hanami, n+1 queries just, for example, just completely do not exist. There is no way to access from the template the database object. There is just not such a way. Okay, yeah, in Ruby everything is possible, but you really need to try. So there is a model part, and the situation is similar. You have one model that actually does a lot, like does the validation, does the database communication, scopes, does the business logic, callbacks. Yeah, probably I forgot about few at least. And in Hanami, again, you have those responsibilities split apart. So validation is extracted to contracts. This is like a separate class to validate the input. Then the repository is responsible for database communication. Then there are relations, which are just definition of scopes and queries. And there is like business logic. This is the last part that I didn't figure out, that you can just write your own, your own objects. And this is common pattern in the Hanami world to have like interactors. This is service objects, interactors, or operations, transactions, like different names for the same thing. This is just having one, like a set of simple objects that do one thing. And this is where the business logic goes. And about scalability, both frameworks support monolith-first approach. So by default, like you start with the monolith applications. There is a saying that there is no successful business that started from microservices. So the biggest companies, successful companies, actually started the other way. Like they started with monolith, started fast, got beneficial, profitable, and then they split apart. And Rails actually does the monolith first, and Hanami also monolith first. And you can extend Rails by engines. This is not like the first way approach. This is just sometimes like less known approach. And in Hanami, you scale. You just split applications, split your monolith responsibilities using slices. This is just maybe somewhat a similar thing. But the nice thing is that in Hanami, slices are independent and work exactly the same as everything else. So they have a call method, and they can be injected to other slices, and you can just orchestrate them, reuse them as you wish. And in Rails, this is not possible. And Rails engines, still are not quite as independent. There is still a way to, or tendency to make a spaghetti code and couple code between engines. And in Hanami, this is just, I didn't see it just at least. Whew. And this is all. Köszönöm. Any questions? Well, not anymore. Until Hanami, Hanami is in beta now. Until that, I could maybe, but I joined to Ascenda because I didn't want to write Rails anymore, and I'm happy. And I'm waiting with some of my side projects until beta because I didn't want to start them with Rails. So Luca Guidi developed it like 7 years ago, I would say, if I'm not mistaken, but this is something like that. They very quickly reached the version 1, the official version 1, and some companies started using it officially on production, but work was slowed down, like stopped on the upgrades. And there was like 2 years of nothingness. Then team Riley from Australia actually came to the core team and started really focusing on rewriting the framework to the Hanami 2 according to the approaches. So the first version was to validate the concepts, how they will work with true applications, and the second version is to actually perfect those solutions. The team is much bigger now, and yeah, and we are very close to reaching 2.0. But for 3 years, they actually were rewriting the framework, and there was like no marketing around it. So yeah, this is quite a time, but just the amount of the work those guys put is just incredible. Yeah, but so this is like if from very beginnings, it's like 7 years, I would say. This is one of the most trickiest parts that we face with Astenda. We are currently figuring that out. Not yet, really. We plan that for the fourth quarter of this year to actually figure out and document the steps to upgrade our applications. And then we will probably help other companies as well to do it. But this is pretty tricky. It is possible. We have some concepts already. A lot of work. I think it's like why people started working with Rise and why they stopped working with Rise. So these questions are worth answering, I would say. And trust-free performance is not the issue. So there is like people started working with Rise because it was trendy, popular, but also Ruby was just nice way to be in, like to write it. And I love Ruby, for example. And the issue was that people, like, it was so popular that people started learning Rise without learning anything else, like no programming basics, but just learn Rise and be the perfect developer. And then he started hitting EU to the application started to grow. And now a lot of people are fading away because they need to fight with applications that are big, but don't just at the beginning without good architectural guide in mind. And this is where the Hanami framework actually aims for. And if you ask about benefits, when it comes to React, for example, or Node.js, the same gap appears in my understanding. Like there is a whole mess in JavaScript community where there are tons of libraries that are incompatible with each other. There is like a mess of having libraries that are not maintained anymore, and the same issue that we have in Rise appears in JavaScript pods right now, where there is like a tons of people that learn React, learn Vue, but not learn programming at all. And because React is so flexible, one of the biggest problems with React applications, Next applications as well. Like Next framework actually was invented partially because to structure React applications, because React was so freaking elastic and people had no guide how to structure projects. So each project was completely different and they could not keep projects, they were in frustration, and they started switching projects that would test out new things and then leaving to other companies. So there are different problems, I would say, but Hanami actually solves tons of problems that appeared by Rise being like monopoly for too long, and guides developers to use best development practices, like general practices, like singular responsibility, to have thread safe objects all the time, and to just scale well by default. So this is why I think it could be the next go-to like Ruby framework in the short time. But of course, if there is a big bet, I put like a big bet on Hanami by just switching fully my career path and starting this project and publicly saying that I love Hanami, which is, yeah, fascist. but yes, I believe that from what is on the available now on the web to build web applications, there is Elixir, like Phoenix framework, which is pretty close to Hanami actually in terms of concept, and this is one part. And yeah, and even if you compare like Python, there is Django framework, which is pretty much what Rise does. Like this is pretty similar to Rise and has a similar issues in their architecture. So I consider Phoenix and Hanami at the moment the best way to write web applications, especially with Hotwire, because I don't like writing JavaScript components and tons of front-end stuff. And now Rise invented Hotwire, which fortunately is compatible with anything, and so this can be used in Hanami as well, which is a new approach, and I really like that actually this is like first thing that Rise invented that is compatible with everything in Ruby. So that's a very big task for them. Well, we for a few years before actually I discovered Hanami, for like 3 years we started patching Rise architecture by doing exactly this within Rise. So we wanted to extend Rise, but extend Rise architecture and solve some overhead that we experienced by using try-RB libraries, for example, and having some validators. We had autorizers, like another abstractions, right? And then we ended up with issues. And issues because the framework by default just do not support it. This is the biggest issue that I experienced. Like by default, there is the right way or just you have problems. And this was our experience. Like we really fought with people and they didn't want to learn anything new. Like there was just they came, like they learned Rise, and what the Rise core team actually suggested they wanted to implement, not what considered to be the better approach for the certain use case. And after just a few years of just reorganizing this stuff, we ended up with a structure that was very, very okay. Like we were very proud of it, and we realized, yeah, when we discovered Hanami, and it appears that the concept we have was very similar to what Hanami does, but Hanami team just did it way better because they didn't want to patch Rise, but they actually brought the framework from the ground up, and like a lot of issues just did not exist, and I would not do it like anymore. I did it, and I would not do it again if I would have a choice. But if a developer works with dry libraries or custom structures in Rise applications, they will have way better time working with Hanami. Because if there's just only concerns and only just MVC concerns and helpers, then really there will be an issue, because this is just, you need to learn programming, and this is how it cannot work. Yeah, this is I made a quick introduction with not using the state. So Ruby is great because it's elastic. It allows to write object-oriented code, but also it allows to write functional code, and you can have type checks. You can have like everything, and then the only thing that matters is the preference of the developer. So if someone actually loves working with Rise and works with the object-oriented part of it, yeah, I would probably never just try to convince him. In my experience, it's very natural for me to consider web development as a functional thing. Like I put a request, I expect the response, nothing happens. But when it comes to modeling business rules, then the state becomes important. And in my understanding, like object path is very good to model a business, for example, or to write a game. So there are like different use cases for different programming styles. And with Hanami, with whole dry RB and the ROM gem families, we actually have alternatives. And this is not like this is the only and correct way, but for different problems, now we have an alternative. And I, as a Ruby developer, can write something using functional objects in Ruby, which I love, and I don't need to learn Elixir, which would be way more overhead for me, for sure, and way more risk to the client if he would need to maintain two different languages instead of one. So if you ask why bothering like writing this in Ruby instead of switching to Elixir, is because we can shift gradually. If I have Rise application and Hanami is composable and injectable, we can even inject Hanami into Rise. And we can have a Hanami component inside of Rise, and it's fully compatible. But the other way around, no. So we can even just rewrite module by module into Hanami for the same applications. And this is completely not possible in the reverse way, and not possible if you would like to switch languages, right? Complete text, right? So yeah, I think there are a lot of benefits in this case.
You mentioned this thread and the issues with states. It was at the very beginning of the presentation. So yes, the advertisement, as far as I remember, thread state, and then even if you run it in Puma.
I'm sorry, just
sure.
one question. Okay.
So yeah, so it's supposed to, on object level, supposed to be thread safe, as far as I understand.
Supposed to be. So there are few areas where it's not, but this is not the biggest case. The biggest case, yeah, there are a few areas where it's not thread safe, but the bigger issue is that because of the kind of philosophy in Rise and how many junior developers joined to Ruby because of just learning Rise, they really looked for the guides, how to write code to go well, and there was just a black hole. Like people were kind of left on their own, and this is like people did not know how to write thread-safe code, and this became issue in the long term. So because you can write thread-safe code in Rise, of course you can. It's just that framework does not help you by default with it. So if you are a new Ruby developer, this is way easier to make mistakes. That will cost a client or you a lot in the future. And so yeah, this is my standard on this. Okay. If that's all, I would say thanks for some.